What you're seeing now is a record of Prince's final hours. For the first time, the world was shown surveillance footage of him walking into his doctor's office less than a day before he died. But what alarms investigators even more is not what we can see. It's what no one can see at all. Inside Paisley Park, a home wired with high-security cameras, something happened in the last 48 hours of his life that still sits at the center of this mystery. A property that was supposed to be under constant watch suddenly went blind. Every hallway, every studio door, every main entrance. According to investigators, in the 2 days before Prince was found dead, every camera was deactivated. Not by a storm, not by a power surge, but, as police later confirmed, by human hands. When his sister, Tyka Nelson, was told that an unidentified person had entered Paisley Park on that final night, her voice reportedly shook. Someone had been inside. And during that same window, someone turned off his cameras. What took place inside that manufactured silence is the question this file is about to reopen. To understand Prince's last hours, investigators had to start with the one place he believed could protect him from the outside world, Paisley Park. This was never just a residence. It was a fortress he designed after years of lawsuits, threats, and people trying to control the legacy he spent his life creating. By the early 2000s, Prince's trust in the music industry was fractured. He was wary of the press and, according to people close to him, even suspicious of some of the faces that had been around for years. Friends said he moved like a man who felt constantly observed. Staff recalled that he slept lightly, double-checked locks, and walked through those long hallways in near-total silence, as if he were listening for something only he could hear. That is why in 2014, Prince made a choice that would later become central to this case. He ordered a full upgrade of Paisley Park's surveillance system. High-resolution cameras were mounted in the main entryway, down the east hallway, outside the recording studios, along backstage corridors, and at key exterior doors around the property. In all, more than a dozen cameras watched nearly every movement. It wasn't a vanity project. According to those who knew him, it was a reaction to fear. There were incidents most of the public never heard about. Packages with no return address arriving at the gates, strangers showing up claiming to have meetings, disputes over unreleased music worth millions of dollars. Whether every threat was genuine or imagined didn't matter. To Prince, they felt real enough to justify monitoring everything. One detail, however, would later overshadow all the others. Only 4 people had full access to the camera controls. First, Prince himself. Second, Kirk Johnson, his longtime friend and assistant, one of the few people allowed to enter Paisley Park without calling ahead. Third, the dedicated security technician responsible for maintenance and repairs. And the fourth, according to official documents, was a non-public employee with elevated access. A person whose name has never been widely disclosed. A kind of ghost in the investigation. When investigators pulled the security logs after Prince's death, what they found was chilling. The system had not suffered a catastrophic failure. There was no record of a building-wide outage, no blown fuse that could explain the blackout. Instead, according to reports, the cameras inside Paisley Park went offline one by one in a sequence that suggested someone who understood the layout had targeted specific feeds. Because only 4 people held those permissions, those 4 individuals became the gravitational center of every question that followed. What was really happening inside Paisley Park that week? Why would a man obsessed with his own security suddenly lose his surveillance blanket? And within that tiny circle of people who made the choice that left the entire compound blind, just as troubling was the emotional backdrop. In the days leading up to April 21, people close to Prince said he seemed different, more private than usual, withdrawn, and oddly unsettled. A man who relied on his cameras to feel safe now found them dark, mute, and unresponsive. If he noticed, and many believe he did, then he spent his final days knowing that someone with access had overridden his last line of protection. In some investigations, a technical problem would be an unfortunate detail. In this one, with this man and this timing, it became the central mystery, a home wired with cameras. No footage from the last 48 hours. And only 4 people who could explain why. In May 2017, inside a modest NBC studio in Minneapolis, Tyka Nelson sat under harsh white lighting, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. When the interviewer finally asked what the family had avoided saying aloud for a year, "Do you believe Prince died from an accident?" she did not answer immediately. She stared at the floor, took a long, slow breath, and then spoke the words that shifted the entire public narrative. "There were people around my brother, people our family had never met." Tyka explained that in the final weeks of April 2016, a new man began appearing inside Prince's schedule. According to her, he was arranging meetings, blocking hospital visits, and moving through the calendar with an authority no one in the family recognized. He wasn't an old friend. He wasn't long-term staff. Yet he had access. Then came the detail that froze the room. On April 20, Tyka said quietly, "This man was inside Paisley Park late at night. He shouldn't have been there." But the real shock came the next morning, when investigators asked to review the surveillance recordings. Every camera in that complex, the hallways, the studios, the entry doors, showed the same thing. Nothing. 48 hours of total blackout. Tyka's voice cracked as she said, "Someone shut them off, and somebody knows why." In that moment, she was not just grieving, she was, in her own way, making an accusation. To understand when the cameras began to die, investigators had to unwind the final week of Prince's life, a week that unfolded with the slow, eerie precision of a clock running out. It began on the 14th of April 2016. At 1:10 a.m., Prince's private jet made an emergency landing after he collapsed mid-flight. Paramedics later said he had been minutes from death. Kirk Johnson, who was traveling with him, contacted Dr. Michael Schulenberg, a physician, and asked him to be available when they returned to Minneapolis. When Prince finally walked back into Paisley Park around 8:45 that morning, something strange happened. One hallway camera, a feed that almost never glitched, blinked to black for 2 full seconds and then came back. At the time, no one reading the logs thought much of it. But later, investigators would flag that flicker as the first sign that the surveillance system was starting to fail. Staff who saw Prince that morning remembered something else. He did not look relieved to be alive. He looked shaken, glancing over his shoulder as though something or someone had followed him home. 2 days later, on April 16, another unusual development appeared in his world. A new name showed up on Prince's internal schedule, a man the family did not know. According to staff, he began coordinating appointments, speaking on Prince's behalf, and making decisions that usually required direct approval. This same man reportedly blocked a suggested hospital visit, telling staff it wasn't necessary. Prince did not argue with him. He simply watched, quietly, offering no clear acknowledgement. The tension in the air, unspoken and heavy, settled over Paisley Park like a shadow. Then came April 18, the day the first camera went fully dark. Around 3:12 p.m., a staff member passing by the security control room noticed that the monitor showing the studio hallway had gone black, not frozen, not distorted, dead. The staff member alerted Prince. Prince walked into the control room, stared at the blank feed, and said softly, "Someone's been in here." He did not raise his voice. He did not point a finger at anyone. According to the account, it sounded as though he already had a suspicion he kept to himself. When the technician offered to come and repair the system, Prince declined. "Not yet," he reportedly said. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or something else entirely, he postponed the fix, a decision that would haunt every timeline built after his death. The next evening, April 19, at around 9:30 p.m., the most critical camera in Paisley Park, the one guarding the main studio corridor, lost its signal. This was the feed that captured Prince most nights as he moved between Studio A, the rehearsal rooms, and the vault containing decades of unreleased masters. The security technician checked the system remotely and told Kirk that an in-person inspection was needed, possibly even a tampering check. But before the technician could come out to the property, someone from the team called to cancel, saying Prince no longer wanted the work done. Later, the technician told investigators he found that unusual, adding that Prince had never personally confirmed that decision. By this point, multiple cameras were no longer recording, but only in the areas Prince used most. Then came the 20th of April 2016, the night everything changed. At 11:40 p.m., the card reader on the east side service door registered an entry from a temporary access card created 3 days earlier. The name assigned to that card did not match any long-term employee. No staff member admitted to creating it. The family had never heard of the person, and there was no indication that Prince had personally authorized any temporary access during that week. What made it worse was that the cameras covering that side of the building had already gone offline earlier in the week. Each one had dropped at different times, as if someone were probing the system and removing coverage piece by piece. According to the access logs, the unidentified man walked through the blind corridor, moved further into the building, and remained inside for about 28 minutes. His exit was only detected because an exterior camera, one of the last feeds still functioning, captured the service door opening again. No face, no silhouette, no movement inside, just a door opening and closing, and a timestamp. Every interior camera that could have seen him was already dark. This was the detail that reportedly shattered Tyka Nelson when investigators explained what had happened. And this was the exact moment she later referred to in her interview when she said, "Someone was in the house that night and my brother's cameras were off." By the morning of April 21, the day Prince was found unresponsive, the surveillance web inside Paisley Park had collapsed. When first responders requested footage, security staff led them into the control room. One by one, every screen displayed the same image. Black. Not static, not error messages, just absence. For investigators, the pattern was hard to ignore. The dead cameras lined up along the hallway to Prince's private quarters, the entrances to the studio, the service door, and the route taken by the unidentified visitor just hours earlier. According to reports, this did not look like a random chain of technical failures. It looked like a series of manual shutdowns carried out in sequence in the very places that mattered most. At approximately 9:43 a.m., Kirk Johnson and others found Prince on the floor near the elevator. When police arrived and started piecing together the last 2 days of his life, they realized that the most crucial window in any investigation, the final 48 hours, simply didn't exist on video. The cameras that should have told the story of Prince's final movements had gone dark at the exact moment the world would later need them most. That realization, the silence, the blank screens, the missing hours, is what made Tyka's voice break when she said, "Someone turned him off, and somebody knows why." To her, this was not a minor technical blip. It was a signal that her brother's final days were not just the isolated medical event the public had been told about. They felt like part of a sequence, a 7-day unraveling, each event tightening the circle around him as the cameras, one by one, disappeared into darkness. When investigators began charting the final week of Prince's life, one name surfaced again and again with an almost uncomfortable regularity: Kirk Johnson, the man closest to him in those last years. Kirk was not just an assistant, not just a friend. Inside Paisley Park, he essentially ran the daily operation around Prince, managing his movements, unlocking doors, screening visitors, scheduling rehearsals, and phoning doctors. He had the keys, he had the codes, and he had the quiet authority to step into the surveillance control room without waiting for permission. In a house where nearly every step was monitored, that kind of access made him uniquely powerful. But there was more. Something that disturbed investigators and fans alike. The pattern of camera failures in the days leading up to April 21 seemed to trace the very corridors Kirk used most. Staff recalled hearing him ask a technician to shut down a few cameras for maintenance roughly a week before Prince died, an unusual request in a place where cameras were almost never turned off. The technician later stated the system could have been serviced without disabling any feeds. And when investigators replayed the timeline, they noticed that the cameras Kirk said needed less coverage were the same ones that later went dark. The east hallway, the studio corridor, the service door route. Within the fan community, speculation grew. Some people believed Kirk was trying to protect Prince during a vulnerable period, shielding him from being recorded at his weakest. Others believed he might have been covering for another person. A smaller, more vocal group online floated a harsher idea that Kirk could have been manipulated or pressured by outside forces connected to Prince's catalog and the immense value locked in his vault. No official evidence has confirmed any of these theories. But the fact remains, Kirk was reportedly the last person to see Prince alive and the one who made key calls during the emergency landing. That alone keeps his name at the center of every unofficial timeline built by fans. The picture darkens further when you add Dr. Michael Schulenberg, a physician whose role in the story is tangled in contradictions. He examined Prince after the April 14 emergency landing and later admitted to prescribing opioids under Kirk's name instead of Prince's. He called it an attempt to protect Prince's privacy. Federal authorities called it improper medical practice and fined him. What unsettled investigators was not only what he prescribed, but when and how often he appeared. Between April 14 and April 20, Schulenberg visited Paisley Park multiple times. Yet, according to reports, not every one of those visits appeared clearly in the security logs. Even more troubling, the cameras that should have captured the corridor leading to the makeshift medical room had already gone black by April 19. One detective reportedly wrote, "There should have been footage of the doctor entering and exiting. There wasn't." Fans, as they always do, formed their own interpretations. Some believe he was simply a doctor, trying and failing to manage a worsening medical situation without turning it into a media circus. Others think he minimized his connection to the timeline to distance himself from the public narrative. On fringe forums, especially among those who follow Prince's long battles over music ownership, a sharper question began to echo. Was the doctor truly as uninformed as he appeared, or was he stepping carefully around what he knew? Tyka herself hinted that someone was not being completely honest, and many listeners assumed she was referring to Schulenberg. His calm, restrained demeanor in interviews only fed speculation that he may have been aware of more than he chose to share. Yet, even with all of that, the most haunting figure in this story is not Kirk and not the doctor. It is the unnamed scheduling manager, the man Tyka refers to as the Stranger. He seemed to materialize inside Prince's life around April 16, almost without context. This man controlled which visitors were granted access. He reportedly decided Prince did not need to go to the hospital. He arranged rehearsals and appearances. He operated with a level of authority that startled those who had known Prince for years. No one in the Nelson family recognized him. Prince never publicly introduced him. Yet he moved as if he held full administrative power. Then investigators uncovered something even more unsettling. This same man was physically inside Paisley Park on the night of April 20. The access logs show him entering through the east side service door at 11:40 p.m. The entry was recorded by a temporary access card created just days earlier. The name tied to that card did not belong to any long-term employee. The cameras that should have captured his path were already dead. When he left 28 minutes later, the only visual record was a single exterior camera, one of the last functioning eyes in a building of blind screens, tracking the service door opening and closing. No face, no body, just a timestamp and a door in motion. Fans have spent years constructing theories about this figure. Some believe he was merely a temporary tour or scheduling coordinator caught in extraordinary circumstances. Others suspect he may have been aligned with business interests who were focused on Prince's unreleased masters, one of the most valuable vaults in modern music. A small group in fan communities even suggested he might be the same person seen accompanying Prince at certain private meetings in late 2015, though no independent evidence has firmly supported that belief. What remains difficult to ignore is that this man had influence Prince never fully explained and access he never clearly justified. But the most opaque shadow in this entire story falls over the fourth access holder, the so-called phantom technician, whose identity has never been made public. Investigators have described him only as a high-level technical contractor with advanced permissions. He was not staff. He was not family. He was not someone fans would have recognized from performances, interviews, or photographs. Yet, he reportedly had the ability to override camera systems remotely, alter logs, disable feeds, or conceal user activity. In simple terms, he was one of the very few people who could have shut the cameras down without leaving obvious digital fingerprints. Among fans, this detail may be the most heavily dissected of all. Some believe this technician acted alone, driven by motives no one has uncovered. Others think he followed directions from someone higher in the entertainment hierarchy. More speculative circles claim he might have been tied to individuals who stood to gain financially from Prince's death, especially given the lack of a will and the staggering worth of the vault. Nothing so far has proven these ideas. Still, the fact that the technician's name remained sealed while other names became part of public record keeps the theory alive that whatever he knew or whatever he did was considered too sensitive to release. Taken together, the four figures around Prince in his final days form a tight, unnerving constellation. Kirk, with access to nearly every room. The doctor, managing powerful medications. The stranger, shaping Prince's schedule and decisions. And the hidden technician, capable of quietly killing the cameras. Each man had a reason to be there. Each had a role that could be defended. But each also left behind gaps, moments that do not line up perfectly, questions that still have no clear answer. And in the middle of it all stood Prince, physically weakened, increasingly suspicious, and more isolated than he had ever been. He moved through the dim hallways of Paisley Park, the fortress he built to protect himself, while the very cameras he believed in began to disappear. One screen at a time. Tyka Nelson's voice broke when she said, "Someone turned those cameras off." But it was what she added next, softer and more haunting, that has stayed with fans the most. And I think one of them knows why. When people talk about the mystery surrounding Prince's final days, their theories almost always curve back toward a single force: money. Not ordinary wealth, but the kind of value attached to an artist whose work has gone beyond charts and into myth. Within fan circles, it was often said that Prince's unreleased vault alone could rival the economies of small nations. Inside that vault were master recordings, alternate takes, videos, and projects that never saw the light of day. And once you step into that space, into the weight of what he was protecting, the timeline of his last year begins to feel even darker. Throughout the 2000s, Prince spent years fighting for control of his masters, after decades of strained relationships with record labels. He refused to sell them. He refused to sign away ownership. He refused to let anyone casually handle the recordings he considered pieces of his soul. By early 2016, it was believed among people close to him that he was preparing a new legal strategy, one that could tilt the balance of power over his catalog in a way that unsettled old agreements. On message boards, fans still repeat a line he was rumored to have said in 2015. "If anything happens to me, they'll try to take it." No one has ever proven he actually said those words, but the phrase spread so quickly and so widely that it became a kind of ghost story in the community. And when he died without a signed will on record, that ghost story only grew louder. What made the situation even more clouded was the quiet tension building inside Paisley Park in the years leading up to his death. Across 2014 and 2015, Prince let several people go: lighting designers, logistics staff, a studio engineer, even a longtime collaborator. To outsiders, it looked like a routine reshuffling, an artist tightening his operation. But those closer to the scene suggested something else. They said Prince was becoming more suspicious, more guarded, and less tolerant of anyone who made him feel observed or constrained. Minneapolis locals remembered seeing him late at night in grocery stores, wearing glasses indoors, talking to no one, choosing self-checkout lanes as if he were trying to move through the world without leaving a trace. Staff said his behavior inside Paisley Park had become more unpredictable too. They recalled him appearing in the hallways at 2 a.m., fully dressed, as if something had snapped him awake, some sound, some presence, some feeling he couldn't ignore. The atmosphere, according to those who had been around him for years, felt fragile. Some people felt edged out. Some felt quietly replaced. Some walked away with a bitterness that never really faded. As he drew further away from most of the outside world, Prince narrowed his inner circle to a tiny, carefully chosen group. Fans often say that he truly trusted only a handful of people, 3, maybe fewer. No one really knows the exact number. What is clear is that by the end, he was living inside a kind of emotional bunker. The isolation only deepened when his hip problems worsened. He cut back on heavy touring, avoided big crowds, and leaned more heavily on a few close companions just to move through daily routines. There were stretches in early 2016 when it was said he spoke to only one or two people in an entire day. In that kind of environment, power dynamics shift, sometimes without anyone noticing. The speculation inside the fan base followed that logic. If one person controlled his schedule, another managed his medications, and another handled logistics, then the lines between help and control could easily blur. Trust could become fragile. Rumors could thrive in the silence. Financial whispers began to blend with stories of personal tension until the community started building its own maps of what might have happened. Some believed long-standing disputes over publishing and ownership resurfaced at the worst possible moment. Others focused on the timing of major business moves. Prince was rumored to be planning in early 2016 moves that could have reshaped who had access to his recordings and revenue. Adding to all of this were the people Prince had cut off over the years. He was known for making hard, clean breaks. There were reports of friendships ended without explanation, professional relationships that simply stopped. No warning. No dramatic confrontation. Just silence. A former dancer once remarked, "Prince didn't break ties. He vanished." Fans took that sentence and used it as a lens to interpret everything: the multiple firings in the 2 years before his death, the shrinking circle, the sense of people being pushed out of his orbit. They imagined unspoken grudges, unresolved resentment, and the sting of being removed from a world that revolved around him. But even those stories feel small compared to the darkest whispers that took root. That Prince's growing isolation made him vulnerable, not just physically, but structurally. Some forum discussions claimed he no longer knew exactly who controlled certain parts of his life by 2016. According to those conversations, people around him might have filtered information, controlled access, and shaped the reality he saw, like a curtain slowly drawing closed around him. Others pushed back on that idea, insisting that Prince himself contributed to the confusion, that he withdrew, that he refused certain kinds of medical care, that he resisted letting more people into his world even when he needed help. In that view, what emerged was a dangerous combination: distrust on one side, vulnerability on the other. A perfect environment for miscommunication, misunderstanding, or something worse. All of this leads back to the moment that split the fanbase in two: Tyka Nelson's interview. It wasn't just her voice or the way she paused between sentences. It was the questions she chose to ask. When she looked into the camera and said, "Why were the cameras off? Who turned them off? Who was in his house the night before he died?" Everything seemed to tilt. The fandom lit up. Her last line became the most quoted sentence in the community. One of them knows the answer. People began treating that one sentence like evidence. Some dissected which word she emphasized, one, them, or knows, and used that emphasis to build entire theories. Some interpreted one of them as referring to the inner circle, the people nearest to him. Others thought she was hinting at someone outside the story the public had been told. On Reddit threads, in private groups, across fan pages, the interpretations multiplied. Some believed the cameras were shut off to protect Prince's privacy during a medical emergency. Others felt Tyka was suggesting that someone entered Paisley Park without true permission, and that the blackout was meant to hide more than a vulnerable moment. But the theory that refuses to die is far more personal. That the person who turned off the cameras was someone Prince trusted, someone whose presence he would not have questioned, someone inside the walls with him. Over time, the final week of Prince's life stopped being viewed as a simple sequence of events. Instead, it became a maze of motives, misunderstandings, power imbalances, and emotional shadows. Every silence began to look suspicious. Every missing piece of documentation felt like a clue. Every name associated with him was pulled into the puzzle, fairly or not. The longer the distance from April 2016, the thicker the fog has become. Fans have filled the empty spaces with their own fears and interpretations. To them, that last week is no longer a straightforward timeline. It is a cloud of unanswered questions, overlapping loyalties, broken trust, and one deeply unsettling idea: that the truth about those darkened cameras may still be sitting in the mind of a single person who has never chosen to speak. After Tyka Nelson spoke the sentence that sent shockwaves through the fan community, the tone around the investigation into Prince's death shifted in a way few people expected. Until then, officials had largely treated the case as a tragic but straightforward medical event. There were toxicology reports, carefully constructed timelines, and formal statements from medical professionals. On paper, everything pointed to an accidental overdose. But Tyka's questions, delivered without theatrics, in a calm, steady voice, forced both the public and investigators to look again at the details that never quite felt settled. Law enforcement went back over the surveillance logs. They revisited access card timestamps. They re-interviewed staff about who was present on specific nights. They reconstructed Prince's movements in those last days with even more precision. Officially, the conclusion stayed the same. His death was ruled accidental. But underneath that, a second layer of inquiry took shape, one that was never fully captured in legal language, but lived in the spaces between conversations, in the questions people couldn't stop asking. Were the gaps in the story there because nothing more was there to find? Or because something important had been missed? The camera blackout became the center of that debate. Authorities acknowledged that the cameras were off, yet insisted it did not change the cause of death. Many in the public found that hard to accept. Media outlets published simplified maps of Paisley Park's layout. Independent journalists pored over maintenance notes, examined staffing changes, and tried to piece together Prince's final rehearsals hour by hour. No one could definitively prove wrongdoing. But no one could fully quiet the feeling that vital pieces of context were missing. At the same time, the legal fight over Prince's estate turned into one of the most complex probate battles in Minnesota's history. With no will on record, the court had to determine who qualified as an heir, assess the true value of the assets, decide who would manage the catalog, and address staggering tax obligations. Portions of the estate's value were sold or leveraged simply to satisfy those financial realities. What stunned many fans was how quickly the harsh mechanics of money and law eclipsed the privacy Prince had guarded so fiercely. Once his vault and catalog became part of the legal process, people outside his immediate family gained access to information he had spent his life trying to shield. Decisions about his music were no longer made by Prince. They were no longer even made solely by his relatives. They were shared across corporations, banks, appraisers, accountants, and attorneys. According to those close to her, this was the part of the story that weighed on Tyka the most. She was not a strategist. She was not a mogul. She was not a media-trained public figure. She was a sister who had lost the only person who fully understood the scars of their childhood. Now she found herself in conference rooms, listening to conversations about percentages, licensing opportunities, publishing rights, valuation models, and property splits. She once reportedly told a family friend, "My brother kept the world out of his music, and now everyone is involved." Her grief became entangled with something else, a quiet, persistent feeling that she was failing to protect the legacy of the person she loved most. In the years that followed, Tyka's life changed in ways she had never expected. She remained in Minneapolis, but stayed away from the spotlight. She avoided large gatherings, turned down most interview requests, and declined to elaborate publicly about the cameras or the unresolved questions surrounding Prince's final days. She visited Paisley Park only a handful of times after it was turned into a museum. Each visit was said to be emotionally heavy, especially when she walked down the hallway toward the elevator. People who accompanied her noticed a pattern. She would stop at the threshold, look into the elevator, hold that gaze for a few seconds, and then turn back without stepping inside. Whether that came from respect, pain, or both, no one could say with certainty. Her relationship with the estate's decision-makers reportedly shifted over time. She backed some projects and opposed others. She pushed, again and again, for choices that reflected what she believed Prince would have wanted: authenticity, integrity, and protection of his creative work. But with so many stakeholders involved, her voice was just one among many. That reality became one of her deepest regrets. Not having more influence, not being able to fully shield Prince's art from the machinery of business. It wasn't rage that settled in. It was sorrow, slow, steady, and enduring. As the years passed, Tyka's role in the fan community transformed. She became less a figure of controversy and more a symbol of loyalty and loss. Fans wrote to her, even though most never received replies. Some simply thanked her for guarding his memory. Others shared theories, timelines, and suspicions, hoping she might read them. She learned to live with the constant echo of strangers' opinions. She did not try to silence them. "People grieve in their own ways," she reportedly said in private. "Some look for answers. Some look for someone to blame. Some just want the story to make sense." What she never said on camera, but those close to her believed, was that she herself was still searching for that same sense of meaning. Tyka never withdrew her original questions. She never softened them. She never apologized for asking them. But she also never escalated them. She let them remain exactly what they were: questions, not charges; observations, not verdicts. She knew they would haunt people. She knew they would fuel speculation. But she also knew they were honest to her experience, that something about her brother's final days felt unfinished, as if pieces of the story were still missing. Prince's death did not explode into a public scandal or transform into a full-fledged criminal trial. Instead, it settled into a quieter, more unsettling place, a space between certainty and doubt. The medical explanation was clear. The emotional context remained blurry. Tyka carried that contradiction with her, without dramatic speeches or public campaigns. "I lost my brother," she once said. "Everything after that is just noise." Over time, she began rebuilding a life around the loss rather than beyond it. She returned more deeply to her faith community, repaired strained relationships, and reconnected with extended family. But the ache never fully receded. In rare, trusted conversations, she admitted to two regrets that never stopped weighing on her. First, that she did not see him more often in his final month. Second, that she was not there on the night the cameras went dark. "I would have stayed awake all night," she said. "I would have checked on him every hour. I would have asked who he was letting in. I would have asked if he was afraid." But the past does not bend. For Tyka, the last chapter of Prince's life remains a mixture of love, grief, unanswered questions, and a quiet hope that, one day, the scattered threads of that week will align into something that finally makes sense. Not because she expects some shocking new revelation, but because she believes every story, even one as painful as this, deserves a moment of clarity. Her final words in that now famous interview still echo, not as a formal accusation, but as the raw plea of a sister who cannot let go of the need for truth. One of them knows the answer: Prince is gone. But the tremor in his sister's voice is a reminder that closure doesn't always arrive in the form of documents or official statements. Sometimes it emerges from conversation from people willing to ask the questions others are afraid to touch. So now we turn to you. If you could say one thing to Tyka, or ask one question about Prince's final days, what would it be? Share it below, and see how many others find themselves searching for the same piece of the story, still reaching for the same elusive truth.